develop under the county
Sure.
standards. I
But
mean,
it
I
sounds
can
like
do
they
a lot of
wouldn't
things.
be able to. Sounds like the
But
city.
as soon as they initiate development, they would then be annexed.
Sir,
Under the IGA, that's what the IGA,
it would be up to the cities to do it. I mean, the cities would have to actually do it. I'm suggesting that we sure impress upon the county commissioners that happened, and the reason is this. That I've never seen this before until I looked at it in that housing survey, and it's really remarkable. And I know how it happened. I mean, there were a lot of North Delta properties that got wanted sewer or water from the city, and I mean, I was city manager way back when we required annexation agreements. But some would have escaped it, so a lot of those are in North Delta. A lot of them are in East Delta, where Tri-County still serves the water, the city doesn't. And they may have gotten not annexed because their parcels served by Tri-County.
So as a solution, would you like to see language that would just require us, if they do try to develop through our codes, that the city does annex? It essentially requires that for them to
Yeah,
develop.
but I think it's really the county commissioners under that IGA that pushes it.
Mhm.
Tries to push it, the sooner the better to clear it up, but I think we need language reflecting unincorporated parcels that are enclaved and how they are not excluded from that definition of unincorporated. That's really confusing.
Yeah.
And then under the UGA as well, that we have some mention of that. Under table 2A.
Could you do a little homework on maybe what surrounding counties do for this weird exemption from the rule?
sure.
If we can find some language. I don't know if I'm ready to tackle language. That one quickly.
That's all right, I just want to read you.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add on this matter?
Well, this came up at the very, very beginning of our land use, when we started the land use code back. Is the people who were designated UGA zone asked, what's my governing authority?
Right.
And they were really objecting to the cities being the governing authority. They said, we want to be in the county.
Right.
And it's sort of part of the impetus for getting away with the zone and going with an overlay. So it's still county designated oversight, although I question whether the city would allow
Right.
anything but themselves to designate what would happen in an enclave like Steve was talking about. I don't know that. I know it's all this relevant to the whole land use code thing tonight, except that there's a designated code for that. It's a different part of the reason. There's a lot of objection to being in the UGA zone and being overseen by the municipalities. We didn't solve it, and maybe
Right.
Steve's point is.
Well,
solve it.
we did away with some UGA, those areas that people were objecting. That was to the west side of Delta, if you remember, that doesn't show up on the existing map as UGA. As a matter of fact, Delta's UGA area now is substantially reduced from what it was, Robbie.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
You look at the other
Cedar Ridge,
towns, there,
Cedar-
Paonia got reduced as well.
Cedar Ridge.
Because they
Cedar
were
Ridge.
annexing.
Maybe it
I
got
mean,
reduced.
the municipalities weren't annexing ground that was in the UGA that they're supposed to when it was getting developed or providing services. So there's no point in keeping it in the UGA.
That seems almost like a different discussion than this. You know, that was
It
these
is.
big broad brush
Yeah.
strokes of UGA. This is
The significance of what I'm talking about is that in Delta, there are agricultural parcels that are completely enclaved.
Mhm.
And we say that if it's an agricultural parcel, it's not in the UGA.
do we say that?
Yeah, where do we say that?
It's in the definition of
Of UGA,
UGA.
that it has to be residential or A5.
Are you talking now back to table 2A, Steve?
Yeah,
Um,
let me see. Areas around municipalities that include active agriculture operations should not be in the UGA overlay. That's in the definition of UGA.
But if they were to come in and say, I have the agricultural land and I want to develop it as affordable housing and I want UGA overlay,
But they could do a bunch of other things under the A designation and table 2B
right,
without even coming to the county, I mean.
Correct.
Or to the city.
right, so they don't
So
have to
that-
annex at that point.
Well, I don't know, they probably could have water or sewer already, maybe. Like if they have a house there. Right, they could go ahead and put in a daycare system with up to however many places for kids without, it's an A designation. They could do a bed and breakfast under our regs. And without going to the city. They wouldn't need water or sewer. I mean, that's how it's confusing in my mind, and really surprised that it hasn't arisen already in some cases, but it's what this enclave area not being solved leads to under our regs. Is a real potential for confusion. And all I'm saying is let's clear it up as best we can in this language. And then press upon the commissioners if that's an issue. We'd like to see them press upon the towns, to take care of it.
No further discussion on UGA. I think we've got notes. I think Carl and Robbie understand what the concern is. Let's see if we can answer, clarify, do something about it, because it's awkward, if nothing else. Okay. Okay. With that, unless there was anything else in A or 2A, let's move to 2B. And over this, and I understand to TK's point about wanting to discuss notification that, you know, it is a chicken or the egg thing. Do we talk about notification before we go through this? But perhaps let's go through this chart and then let's address notification on the tail end of that. Because, you know, you brought some things up about the LN and maybe everything should be LN instead of L, but.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that we need the chart to do it, it's more conceptual thing, but if you want to save it to the end, I'll save it. I think it may be helpful in advance, I guess I feel like where we've come down in our land use code is there's been a push for expediency to get things and applications approved quickly, and I think that's led to the way to do that is administrative approvals, and those administrative approvals don't necessarily include notification, but even if they do include notification, doesn't necessarily mean there's a hearing. So I guess my thought is, I think the land use code, to be fair and equal to everybody across the board, should be more of a conditional use for anything that's commercial, that's not agriculture, including some agricultural uses, including some of the intensive ag. I think if you're going to put in even a medium animal feeding operation, which we define, I mean, on the Cape Working Committee, those are large numbers. I'm just saying it's a conditional use. Doesn't mean that it gets denied because there are standards that can meet for those. So if an applicant comes in and meets the standard, I think one of the things Don was pointing out is there's no opportunity to deny it, but it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be an opportunity for a public hearing. And that to me is what the conditional use is being used for. Plus, I think, you know, we've been through sort of a contentious period where, you know, there were, you know, I want to say threats and other things that happened that were, you know, sort of against us personally. And I think if all you do is, if staff is doing these administrative approvals, and I'm concerned with security. I think conditional use takes the burden away from, puts it in the planning commission's door, makes us hear it. The applicant knows it's going to go to a public hearing. But again, if they meet the standard, they're not coming here to get denied, they're coming here for a public hearing. We have them all the time, neighborhoods, we become the neighborhood meeting. You know, we're trying to do them pre-application meeting, pre-neighborhood meetings. But then essentially, they always end up being here. I saw the same thing at a Board of Adjustments hearing. There was no opportunity to speak until it got to their appeals. So I guess my thought is for the land use code, to be fair and all the way through is that if it's a commercial use, And that includes ag, and I can go down here. Anything, kennels, light industry, medium industry, heavy industry. You know, if you're going from a single use, that's not a home-based business. I don't wanna supplant the idea of a home-based business. That's not what I'm talking about. But in your mini storage, or, you know, if you're doing something that's of a commercial nature, you're developing business, I think should be conditional. Again, if they meet the standards, it doesn't mean they're gonna be denied. It would only be a forum for a public hearing, which means you notify and the neighbors would have a place to hear it. Without that, you're essentially relying on staff to negotiate on behalf of the neighbors. That's what staff is doing with the administrative.
With an L,
They're-
is what you're talking about.
Yeah, even if they don't, and I don't know that that's really fair. I know in my own experience, they didn't cover everything I would have wanted covered. Even, of course, I probably had a chance to write it, but I would have rather had the public hearing with the applicant there. And planning commission can always add conditions that we think, even to an approved plan or a plan that could be approved, we can add conditions that we think are viable. Doesn't mean that we deny them. But that's my thought. I don't know that we need the entire land use code to be able to discuss that, but that was my thought for tonight.
That commercial uses get bumped from L to C.
Yeah,
Was I misguided in thinking there was discussion from the L to LN? Or is this kind of more what you're referring to, that notification simply wasn't enough, that you want hearings?
yeah, I don't think there's a forum for the public, for the neighbors to speak out, even if they're just notified.
So I think you probably want to take these kind of case by case, but I'd also add, so like the automobile fueling and service station. It's conditional use and everything except the rural industrial commercial zone, because there should be an expectation that that's going to be a commercial use. So I don't think I would say it would be across the board conditional use.
Yeah, I guess I look at it, if it's a commercial use, farm supply, feed and seed, if it's a commercial use of business, not a home-based business, I look at it as a commercial use. I look at, animal feeding operations, if they're meant for, for commercial uses, meaning supplying beyond their farm, I think it's a commercial use.
So by across the board, do you mean A35, A20 and A5? I think that's the distinction Carl's trying to make, that in the rural industrial commercial zone that we don't necessarily need a public hearing and a conditional use permit for commercial uses, because it's kind of implied in the zoning district that that's what that district is for.
We don't have enough rural industrial commercial, and we're getting things described as rural and industrial in an A35 or an A20. And it's
Right.
not-
But in the areas we do have identified as rural industrial commercial, in the few places in the county that are zoned that way, do you think that all of those uses you're talking about should still be a conditional use permit? Or are you mostly talking about in A35, A20, and A5?
A20s,
And presumably in the residential.
and the residential, yes. I don't.
But you also mentioned kennels, which are under the land use code is under an ag or rural industry. Are you also speaking to the rural industry applying the same way versus we
Yeah,
have the commercial land use category? Those are the ones that have been identified specifically as commercial uses. Or rural medium industry has an agricultural connotation to it, if it has a slaughterhouse or meat processing.
but you process non-agricultural uses like a mini warehouse as a rural medium industry.
Well, that's why we split it out as a storage facility under commercial use.
Yeah, I guess if it's, even if.
Okay, yeah.
Even if it's ag, and of course, that's the dilemma for me, I think all ag should be approved, but I think if we're doing a slaughterhouse or meat processing, it still should be conditional. There should be a public,
I
You almost have to go through
Yeah, I
them line by
think we're
line.
going- I think we're going line by line.
I will just add kind of a plug for, recommendation or for staff to look at the definition of commercial in the definitions is kind of like, basically defines itself as like a commercial use is where there's a commercial use. It's kind of how it reads. So it might be worth looking at that definition and maybe expanding upon it, or
Making it more clear.
making it clear what's commercial. There's like one somewhere else that says like, you can rent a room as long, or you can rent a unit as long as it's not commercial, and that's kind of confusing about what, what is commerce? Yeah.
I would suggest that if we have continued meetings on this, which I assume we will, that we break down sections of looking at the land use code with section by section and then definitions,
Might be.
Yeah, section unto itself.
Oh, yeah.
that we take a look at that.
Yeah.
Well, table 2B is used in conjunction with the definitions. They're all defined in the definitions.
Right.
So they really go hand in glove
Mhm.
as far as what it is that we're talking about, what that use encompasses. And as TK was mentioning, like, right now, we don't have storage facilities, so when somebody came in and wanted to put in a mini warehouse storage facility, it was, where does it fit best
Mhm.
under this matrix? And if it doesn't, then it's not permitted.
So line by line?
Yeah, starting at intent of agriculture, TK, you'd like to see Cs in small animal feeding operations. Because you think their impact is still heavy.
Yeah, we go back to our definition of small, it was still up to what, 50,000 birds or
15,000.
15,000, yeah, it's still a significant amount. Again, we have standards that go with the setbacks, and like, if they meet the standards, they're gonna get approved, so staff reviews them for the standards and says, hey, this meets the standards, there's no variances. But it doesn't mean we can't have a hearing. In other words, the public has a chance to speak and weigh in. And we as a planning commission are that forum where we can, if we think there are other conditions that may be useful, we can do that. Otherwise, it's 100% left on staff to do that. And if they're missing it, it's a missed opportunity.
And whether it's L or LN, meaning it's staff reviewed, but not public hearing. Does staff have any ability to put conditions upon those?
Yes.
The director can always
Yeah.
designate, but that, when you have that ability for the director to make that determination, it can be looked on as not being fair and equal across the board. If they know there's a conditional use, that there's gonna be a public hearing, then everybody knows. And they come in, they apply, go, well, can you do this administratively? Everybody wants it done administratively, and most of them don't want it, but if they already know up front, hey, we're gonna have a hearing no matter what, if you meet the standards, you're gonna get approved, we're still gonna have a hearing. That's, everybody knows right up front.
But if what you're suggesting is, we could essentially scrap most of this matrix, just put, if you're gonna make money off of it, you have to come to the planning commission. As a dramatic,
They'll make money off it would incorporate home businesses. I'm not saying home businesses are the same. I don't want to stifle the ability for a home business. But at one point, somebody has to determine, is this a home business or a commercial venture? Many warehouses, to me, are a home business.
right?
A commercial feed store that has retail isn't a home business.
But at least from what I'm seeing here, from what we've been given from the county commissioners, is they don't want to see a whole lot of C.
Correct. That's my whole point here. There's a push to do these administrative approvals because of expediency, and I think they have skirted around the point of land use code. They have eliminated the ability for neighbors to be participating. That's the way I see it. That's
And-
how I read their interpretation. Some of these we were dealing with as well, but based on my own personal experience recently, I really feel differently.
When you give the public notice for any of these things with the N next to the L, does that include the contact information for planning staff and kind of says, reach out if you have any concerns or problems? I think most of the reason why these are L is because they're trying to support anything ag, and that means, and the conditions of approval are not loose, they're pretty well in place to protect the neighbor, which is why I think they're limited. I don't think it's, I don't think it's cutting out the neighbor. I'm just I think is just saying the neighbor doesn't get to tell me no, or put in additional limitations on what I have the right to do, and that's what the L is, you know, it's like, if you bring it up to standards, you can have ag.
Right, and again, I'm saying, you can meet the standards and staff can recommend approval. If they've met the standards, there's no variances or anything else, but it doesn't mean you don't have to have a hearing. A lot of neighbors don't want to write in, they'd rather speak at a hearing than when there are other neighbors there to support them. But I mean, that's what we have seen here. You know, people come in, sometimes it's more people than you expect, but people come in and speak and they feel, I don't want to say empowered, but it isn't to be able, you know, you can start out, we're not going to get to deny it because it meets the standards, but they should be able to get heard.
Are we talking about uses that, like, just using agriculture for an example, that are outside of actually agriculture?
I'm including ag commercial use. If it's a commercial venture,
So you
So-
think that there should have to be a public hearing and notice for someone that has property in ag designated zone properties to conduct agriculture on the property?
no, if they're gonna change the use from just doing normal agriculture this into some type of commercial venture.
Oh.
I own cows, but now I'm gonna build a slaughterhouse.
Okay.
You know, or I'm gonna, you know, I have,
Hemp processing facility, fall into your.
yeah,
I don't think this is getting confusing, if think around again, like. We're not talking about just ag, we're not talking about the feeding operations anymore, now we're talking about. Hemp processing and everything else. But what about just the ag, like just feeding lots, just intensive agriculture? I think that is what we're kind of,
well,
Wondering.
specifically on intensive agriculture, if I remember, and I haven't done it, if you go down and bear into these, what's the definition of sapo, mapo, and you know, concentrated animal, or that's aquatic, and lapo, which is large, there's a lot of animals.
there's a lot of animals. I think
And
that,
that to me is a commercial venture, not necessarily industrial, but a commercial venture. I think all of our, you know, Mennonite barn too, no, they're commercial ventures.
but our whole point in the land use code, taking from the master plan, is to promote agriculture. So if they want to become a commercial ag and they're, you know, zoned for ag, I think it's a different conversation if we're talking about a 5-acre piece versus a 35+ acre piece. But I do think that's the reason that they made it that way. I'm here for your guys' input on that, but I think the more, you know, the easier it is for people to do agriculture, the more we're following our goals in the master plan to, you know, promote ag
Again, if they meet the standards for that, they're gonna be approved.
with conditional as well.
No, the conditional use just requires a hearing. It's not with conditional use. I mean, planning commission could put additional conditions on, but not deny it. And I think that,
Well, actually, you could recommend denial. For a conditional use, you approve, conditionally approve, or deny. Recommendation to the Board of County
But we
Commissioners.
have to.
Correct, yes.
But for middle ground, would you consider? Like Victoria mentioned, you know, something like an A5, maybe we see some more Cs and maybe even A20, but on A35s. Which if I recall, in our, you know, when we did this a long time ago, we really wanted to make sure A35s had the. Because those are the properties that could mitigate the issues because they had the land.
I think there's another thing to consider here, right? The feeding operations have been some of the most contentious things we've dealt with. That's where you get people that come to a meeting and they're not just coming to voice opposition, but they're coming to talk about, well, who's gonna pay for the road repair with all the new traffic? What about dust control? You know, and yeah, a lot of those things are in the code. And administrators are looking out for that, but the neighbors are always bringing new insight to these meetings, and that's been the most important part of processing these meetings. Whether it was, you know, gravel pit, or whatever it was,
Operation hours.
operation hours, there's been, that's where it's in the flesh where these things come to light. And we've always approved them, but often we've added the condition based on neighborly concern, and I think that's one of the most important parts of land use process.
In effect, their neighborhood meetings.
yeah, that's what,
We've always railed against that,
what
but
we're
that,
having them.
that's what they turn out to be, and there's some
It's where the,
cathartic.
it's where the people that are gonna be most affected have an opportunity to mitigate some of those potential effects. And, you know, I think it's been very important for neighbors to weigh in on that. So no matter the zone, it's really the impact, right, to the potential impact. And I don't know about the small, but the medium and large feeding operations are pretty impactful. Or have potential to be pretty impactful depending on their immediate neighbors. And that could be road impacts, drainages, you know, wastewater, sound, noise, dust, all of these things. And really the only opportunity for all of it to come together is in the meeting. So I think it's very important to provide an opportunity for people to be heard. To Tom's point, it's not for the case of denial, but it's to mitigate impact.
So I think also, I just wanna interject though, the intensive agriculture, while there could be effects. You're saying then regardless of the zoning, it should be a conditional use, even if it's A35 where it's expected to have intensive agricultural use, that it should be a conditional use. That's how I'm taking the conversation, but also the first line, agriculture, agribusiness. And viticulture including tasting rooms, which is commercial. Shouldn't be an allowed use, it should be a conditional use. I think we need to take these line by line and look at each zoning designation. It may be a different conversation for the residential one versus A35.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm not so concerned about conditional use as when there's notice, there's, you know, if it's an L or and it with an N, I think that leads to a hearing.
That would be conditional.
That would be.
That would be-
Then your LN are the same between the 2023 and the 2021. You're just saying, the potential for public, so it's more of a definitional, not so much going line by line, because when you could pull up 2021 and then you pull up 2023, the LN is the same in the categories
Under the
But
intensive
just
ag.
under intensive ag, correct?
Just what LN means for
Right,
us.
so that's what, if you're saying just, if LN is now to mean that there is the opportunity for the public, then then you don't have to go through the line by line, you can just say LN means there is opportunity for public to weigh in.
But it doesn't mean that. Going on what LN can be done administratively, conditional use can't.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that what you want to address
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
going line by line? That's all I'm
Yeah.
asking.
There's another avenue that I see could be potentially in this new code. There is the requirement for neighborhood meetings to happen if there's basically a conditional use, if there is a public hearing, and we could require a neighborhood meeting if it's a notice thing, whether or not it's a public hearing, and that might give the public a chance to have those neighborhood meetings. And then if out of that neighborhood meeting comes still a lot of concern or a lot of backlash, then probably the people that attended those public meetings or those neighborhood meetings would be compelled to write the director and say, I'm still not satisfied with the whatever solutions that were brought up, or I think this should be leveled up to a conditional use. Because I think we're also trying to prevent those neighborhood meetings from happening in this room during public hearings. So there's two sides where we want the public to be able to speak, but we don't want to facilitate those neighborhood meetings.
Well, yeah, ideally, yes. We'd love to see the pre-application on the neighborhood meetings happen outside of here. But the reality is they've happened here. So I've looked at it saying, okay, what's the history of what we're doing? We had.
But we've never had a neighborhood meeting required before in the code.
Well, yeah, so in other words, I don't think people are just gonna buy into it just because it's in the code. So the conditional use, putting a C on it, just notifies the applicant that, hey, we're gonna have this hearing. Doesn't mean you're gonna get denied if you meet the standards and the conditions. I think that's, again, I heard that from Don. He created a situation where that if the standards are met, it can't be denied. So if we can do that, why can't we have a public hearing? And still know that there's gonna be input. Again, I also think it takes the heat off of staff and the director. Because if they just administratively approve it, they're gonna be responsible for everything that's in there. And like Kate said, there's so many things we found that the public brings up that aren't being represented. And I think it's a short-sightedness. I think that the LN has been there to expedite time.
So essentially anything that's an NLN, you would like to see it as a fee, But
We're gonna
I don't-
get support for that.
yeah.
Well, I'm not saying I would have support. I'm just giving you my perspective. I throw it out here because we don't have to have a land use committee to talk about it. Sorry.
Victoria.
I was going to support Kate's idea that we can require a public meeting as well for the LN. Just because
Neighborhood.
if that is language that we're already implementing as required public meetings, they're gonna have to follow it in the Cs, so why don't we just require the public meeting in the LNs as well to try to get something, and I really do think that if they're passionate enough about it, regardless of who they are, they'll find a way to get their complaint across. And if the meeting doesn't go well and they're not comforted by what the applicant tells them, then I think they would take their concerns to the staff. Again, I definitely would vote against making it all conditional, especially in the ag, just because I think that our whole purpose here is to promote agriculture. But I do think that's a great idea to have an opportunity for the public to put an input in when it's something that is impactful.
So I think there clearly are going to be instances where, you know, conditional use will be important, that we need to ensure that their neighbors are being heard and that that's taken into consideration. I think it would be really difficult to enforce neighborhood meetings. I think that'd be really, really tough to do. I think the other side of the coin, though, that concerns me is you look at this chart and there just seems to be very few A's. And it's like, if you want to eat and sleep there, we'll let you do that. But outside of that, you're coming to us. And I think, you know, being born and raised here, and I think what a lot of people like about Delaware County is an aspect of freedom. And when I look at this chart, there's so many C's and LNs where it just seems like, I don't know, I just feel like we're slipping away. And that concerns me.
So specifically, what, you know, I mean, home businesses are basically all pushed towards the A category. And Tom's mostly talking about commercial entities. So what specific commercial entity are you?
I'm not talking specifically about commercial entities, I'm just talking about, you go through this chart and there's very few A's, like private burials, okay? If you want like single family residence, okay, like those are A's, but then you get outside of literally the use of sleeping and building your home on your property. And there's just not that many A's. There's just not that many like, yes, you're allowed to do that on your property. And that's, I don't know, that's concerning to me.
But Todd, doesn't it come to the point where when you potentially impact others, that maybe that's where that voice, I mean, I think the idea that I see behind a public meeting is to encourage understanding, communication. When a lot of them come to us, it's because they haven't done that. And I think instead of, you know, enforcing, you know, I think that word is always a real fun word. But if we encourage developers to say, hey, the reason why you have these meetings is to help out with communication and understanding of what you're trying to do. Sometimes we have people coming, are they gonna use downlights on a building? I mean, it's just like some of the stuff that comes across us is stuff that is actually already gonna be handled in one of the requirements that they have to have anyway. So is there anything specific maybe? I would like that. I mean,
Right.
do you see something you say, hey, I think that should be more of an A?
Like manufactured home park could just be allowed, you know, without, or multifamily. Looking at this list specifically, I think we need to get into specifics line by line.
I think it would be a great thing for us to go through this line by line.
Great.
I really do.
Let's start. Small animal feeding operations.
Can I just? Private property rights and land use code are generally on opposite ends of the spectrum. It's really hard to have unlimited private property rights and land use code. And that's
I get it.
always an issue.
And I know that line,
And
especially with how
And we're battling
our
that.
demographics are changing in this
Right.
county, that line is gonna be really difficult to follow.
Yeah, it's really,
It is.
but that's what, and that's where that's why we're, at odds, or not really, but that's why we're discussing it.
Sure.
And I'm just trying to figure out, all right, how do we take that step where people have to do it? If you change the definitions like you're suggesting, that you've changed the rules, I'm okay with
Well,
that.
that's what I asked at the beginning. You said that.
Well, yeah, I guess I didn't anticipate thinking that someone said, all right, we'll just change the definition of LN. I don't know that the county commissioners will agree with
They did actually, Wendell suggested you guys look at notification, which is why I brought up L to LN.
that. Okay,
But
if
he
we
had-
change the rule like that, or the definition so that it includes public hearing, then I'm saying that's essentially, that gets us to where we wanted it, and that's a good comment.
The one example that just clearly points out to me right now, additional resident. You're telling me anything that's over 35 acres is designated A35. And if I have 1,000 acres, you get to put one home.
No, you get to put as many, you just have to come to the county and ask for it.
You need to show that you need to have, you have water, you have access. It's showing that you meet the standards for the additional units, because we've had a number of cases where people have just built and they haven't had a permitted access, or they haven't had water. And they connect on to an existing water tap, even though the water tap's only for one unit. Or they add on to a well, and the well permit is clearly for one unit. So,
There's state regulations.
well,
I think that's the problem is.
what you said,
Well,
Well, you should put one.
so.
that doesn't happen all the
Say
time.
that, other than, just people don't always do the right thing.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Here's another, I guess, difficulty that I have is. Are there gonna be people that are gonna do some things that they shouldn't? Are there gonna be a lot of people that maybe have 100, 250, 300 acres that are gonna build multiple homes and are gonna do it the right way? I think so. I think there's a point where you say, if every time this situation occurs, there's a chance for property owners to be harmed, I think that's a great place for land use code. But you can land use code to the gills, there's gonna be somebody that's gonna mess it up.
Sure, but for septic systems, for instance, right, you can certainly contaminate other people's property or downstream waters and septic systems. If you build more units, the septic system allows that could happen. You come into the county, you've got more than 35 acres, the county's, assisting you to say, hey, you're gonna need a septic system. Some people don't know, so they're not necessarily doing the wrong thing, but they're just gonna throw up another unit and help their
But
family.
limited or conditional use doesn't communicate to me, we're trying to assist you. It communicates to me, you're asking permission.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I think that's
To your
like,
point,
that's
the state
the,
already doesn't allow you to connect. Unless the field is designed to accommodate multiple homes, which happen.
right, but the state's not here, right?
But are we gonna completely reduplicate everything that the state is enforcing in our county and our land use code?
No, I think that a lot of this is theoretical, that we should go through this line by line.
I agree with that.
Before we get into the matrix, we're gonna go to LN, we're gonna look at the definition so that we have our basis for ALC. Should have done that at the beginning. Okay, we had a good dialogue. Land use code, it's kind of a bummer. We all wanna do what we wanna do. All right, are we close?
We are close.
Okay. Brittany, I'm counting on
No,
part of the job description.
no, it wasn't.
So the notification, actually. Go to table 7B, if you could, quick, there. So you have 4 different types of notification: publication, posting, mail 1, mail 2. So where you have the N after an L, it requires posting and mail 1. And so 14 days, it says before a public hearing, the property would be posted and mailed to adjacent property owners, including properties separated only by a right of way.
You
So-
say before public hearing,
Right,
which an LN is not.
it's not a public hearing, it's a public notice,
Okay, so the wording may be a little funky there.
right?
So Katie, what you were maybe suggesting is in other requirements, is that where we would put neighborhood
Could,
meetings, or does that fall somewhere else?
There's a section that talks about neighborhood meetings and it says
that's at
they're
the end of chapter
encouraged,
7.
they're encouraged for everyone, but they're required for basically before a public hearing, before a project comes to a public hearing. So you could also say they're required for any project that requires notice.
I don't see that. I don't see where a neighborhood meeting is required. The
So
applicant shall.
if you go down. Go down to table 7C first. So here, the first line is related to limited uses. Marked with an N, and that's where it specifies that it's posting and mail 1, it's the type of notice required.
Okay.
So this is where you could also have an asterisk if there's some other type of notification required. Versus the line below it is the conditional use. As you see, there's 2 hearings, one at the planning commission and one at the board of county commissioners. So then keep going down. Brittany, keep going, section 6. There, so this is where it speaks to when a neighborhood meeting applies. And you could specify if there's an LN or, whatever that might be. Right now, it's focused only on items going to the planning commission and the board of county commissioners. But if you wanted to have the limited use where it requires notification included, that could be incorporated into this section.
How does that settle with the board?
The board of the planning
TK, I know the commission, we're not one.
So this is saying that the neighborhood meeting is required only when it goes to the planning commission.
Correct.
To me, that's more onerous to put that extra step on somebody. Even though we as a requirement, even though it's good for them to do.
It's not a requirement.
It is a requirement if it's going to planning commission or.
Right. Now they have to have 2, basically, 2 evenings subjected to comments.
What are the 2?
With that,
What are the 2?
The meeting and then
The neighborhood meeting and the
public
hearing.
right? I mean, yeah, it's nice to have,
When
but
it comes to neighborhood.
should we require people to do neighborhood meeting if they already have to go to a planning commission hearing? That seems like now we're adding hurdles.
So are you suggesting only neighborhood meetings for ones that are notified but not going to?
I just think that we're adding additional hoops to jump over. When if it's, we could suggest it, I don't know if it should be a requirement. But, that's one of many.
The first line under A, applicability, said all applicants are encouraged.
Oh, yes.
Encourage is not a requirement.
But
Not-
reading.
But the second sentence, projects that are referred to the planning commission and our board shall be required to hold a neighborhood meeting. And this came out of the planning commission, not wanting the public hearings in front of the planning commission to be the neighborhood meeting. So this was created by this body. I just want to refresh memories here. Yeah, well, and that's,
I think if public hearing, to change the definition of Allen's public hearing, then the neighborhood meeting is still can be encouraged.
Encouraged, but I don't know about required.
But that's with everything turning into a C like you want.
Well, again, I was working within the framework of what we had, it's not changing the definition, so I'm like, okay, if I just say create a C,
Sure.
we're having the conversation around the concept of what I'm talking about and finding other solutions. I'm okay with that.
Well,
But if there's no support for it, you know, if generally, and we haven't heard from everybody, they want to leave it as is, I'll go away.
well, and we also. At this body, we had the conversation about. The planning commission being the decision-making body for conditional uses. So it would just be the one hearing. That's very different than coming to the planning commission and then also having to go to the board, having 2 hearings for a conditional use. When I presented that to the board wasn't ready to go there for conditional uses. You know, but so it requires 2 hearings. That was what the board was kind of grappling with between limited use, conditional use is the amount of time that it's gonna take to go to the 2 hearings versus the administrative review. So they were trying to balance that with also making sure there was adequate notification or review at a technical, what needed to be reviewed at a technical level by staff. No notice required. What might have issues with the neighbors to include the notification, the LN. So that at least the neighbors would be aware, they'd have an opportunity to voice their concerns. And at that point, then the director would have the ability to elevate it to a public hearing at the planning commission and the board.
That's the intention behind the LN is that
Right.
if nobody has concern. it goes
Right,
through.
why are we going through two hoops?
Sure, but it's just what we define as what should be in the LN or,
Right,
you know, large feeding operations have often been. Something that people want to voice their opinion about, you know, requiring basically, you know, puts you up for 3
yeah.
evenings of it. And I think that's a carryover from the specific use, really, when we had the area planning committees, right? And they were facilitating a neighborhood meeting. And I don't know if it was required back then, you were not here tonight, but that, yeah,
They
those are
became
required. So some of this might be a little bit of a carryover from that.
Which we heard from the public that they like the APCs, at least some of the public, you know, like that opportunity to talk
Right.
with the neighborhood. So the question is for us tonight. Do we want to require neighborhood meetings of C, which it currently is? And do we want it to apply to LNs? In addition,
Well, I would say, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but the first question, I don't think we should, if there's 2 hearings coming. Planning commission and trustees, I don't think we should require a public, a neighborhood meeting. It behooves the applicant to get out in front of it behooves them to do that, for sure, but I don't know if we should.
yeah, but we're behooving them.
Yeah,
Forcefully.
I think we're adding an extra layer of, an extra hurdle to jump over personally, but.
And I sort of agree with Tate. I'm still focused on, again, I go back to. If we administratively approve something, there really is no ability to appeal it. If somebody hears about it, my experience is that we heard an administrative approval and we appealed it 3 months after it was approved. So it was a moot point whether or not it was gonna change. We didn't get any conditions, so, but if you have a public hearing where conditions can be added and things, which again, I think is the planning commission's
And-
role.
Is it because you think the public that is notified in the LN? It's not a wide enough net, it's a preference of how people like to submit their concerns, it's the staff isn't actually listening to those concerns like the planning commission would, like what, like if there is notice. I guess, what do you see as the problem if people do have a chance to write in to speak to the director? It's a way people like to communicate, like. Or is it that you don't think that's actually a lot, yeah, it's not actually allowing, we think it's allowing for people to comment, but it's not.
I think it's a chance for people to be heard.
Yeah.
It's the only chance they can write a letter, but they don't get a reaction necessarily out of that letter, right? When they're speaking face to face with us or the trustees, then they can get a reaction and potentially see action on their efforts. Right, whether it's a road maintenance agreement or screening, all of those things that we've considered this, for all this time. Has been because people have come here to say, hey, this could be an issue, I live there, you might not have thought about this. So I think that's why it's so important, it gives people truly a chance for their voice to be heard. Mostly for mitigation, I don't think if there's anything we've denied except for that junkyard.
So anything, I guess, TK and Tay, like anything that requires public notice, you think should also include a public hearing?
No, I don't think that. I think we have to go line by line. I specifically only tonight, medium and large feeding operations. I don't think small feeding operations should be required for.
So, hey, you're good with the definitions as they stand, it's just there's some things that need to be changed to conditional instead of
Well,
Ellen.
I think my approach was to change it to a C, but if you change the definition of.
But I guess I'm trying to get at, are we trying to change the definition? If people are okay with these standards, there's kind of three options. Is it a line by line issue, or are you looking to change the LN to mean there's a public? To me, it doesn't make sense to change LN means there's a public hearing. That's just changing LN to C.
That's right.
And that's a line by line issue.
I think I personally think it's line by line issue.
Is there anyone else, David?
I kind of agree with what these two guys are saying. I think there are certain areas. The large, medium, and I think maybe that should be bumped up to C.
Okay.
You know, you think of the impacts that are likely to have concerns from the neighbors, maybe we bump those up, but not everything.
But you're okay with the way the definition said L, L, N, C,
Well, I'm okay with that,
neighborhood meeting.
but.
I feel like the neighborhood meeting is kind of like
Yeah, I agree with what these two guys are talking about. I think line by line, a couple of these larger industrial intensive uses maybe should be moved from L to C.
But to Carl's point, you know, things that are in the rural industrial area, there should be an expectation that stuff gets approved. I don't think that's a noticeable.
Right.
You know, I'm not talking about the RA.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
That's.
Okay.
That's.
So back to line by line?
Yeah, I think we're going back to B. Okay, let's try to get through 2B tonight. At least.
Let's just get to the top part of 2B.
We'll get through.
And how do we deal with like when the group split? Is that just a no consensus?
I think we did this with our last time. We did straw poll voting and
Yeah.
up down.
Sometimes.
We want a consensus kind of discussion.
I don't know if we're gonna get there. If some people think they should be all A's and some people think they should be all C's.
TK will have to work. Okay, we're starting with small animal feeding. Do we need any changes? Speak now.
Just to be clear, we're not changing the definition of L and N.
I didn't hear any.
It's definite changes.
Let's go back.
No,
We could make Brittany scroll.
And just going back, just starting at the top.
Sure.
Viticulture, agribusiness has commercial context, all allowed uses in every zone, including the residential zoning.
We really like wine, Carl.
Well,
Taste
I
and
just, that there's commercial, anything that has a commercial context to it, I wanna make sure that
It is.
that's a consensus.
But to Victoria's point, master plan clearly stated.
And what's our business going down? That is pretty. Is there a definition to agribusiness?
Yes.
Hold please.
Means a group of land uses that are related to grazing or raising of livestock or land uses which produce products that originate from the land's productivity such as farming, ranching, forestry, viticulture, floriculture, beekeeping. Greenhouses and stuff. It's not intensive agricultural or marijuana uses.
So. Are we okay with,
What are the numbers again on small medium and large?
we're not there yet. We're still in agribusiness. Well, okay, I'm not seeing anything. Okay. First one stays. Small, medium, large. I think it's up to 150 animal units, if I recall. And then animal units,
So right now, small is 50 to 140 animal units, medium is 150 to 999, large is 1,000 plus.
And an animal unit is considered,
An animal unit is measured, the impacts of 1,000-pound cow equivalent.
so pigs are more,
So. Right,
it's 15,000 chickens.
The dairy cows are more than the beef cows. To me, it seems like a cow is
They poop more. They take more infrastructure. We pulled this, if I recall, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we pulled this from some like national standards and they had dairies as higher.
so, but.
You guys explain that, you were on the K4,
Mhm.
she doesn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was.
What did you guys do, what did you look at?
yeah, like I said, we looked at standards. I think this came from either USDA or you know, somewhere where we took this, maybe even from Weld County. Speaking from experience, you know, walking through a beef herd and walking through a dairy is a far different experience, and then elk even more so, and I think it mostly pertains to manure. Elk probably has a drier, lighter manure, without getting into the too shitty of details.
And the 149 animal units equals how many chickens? So we put in the
15,000.
15,000. And so, you know, I don't know how impactful 15,000.
We've got several of these houses in the North Fork, and this is why the CAFO working group was started, was because of this, and is why we have standards around it. Because we wanted some kind of, you know, oversight, so.
probably to answer your question, I think, remember I'm on the hard time. I think the reason there's dairy and non-dairy or whatever it is, because the state does it.
State, yeah.
So we follow a lot of the state standards.
I would for a state, like a chart similar to our animal unit chart, but I couldn't find anything on the state website, so. I thought maybe that was the case, but I couldn't find any information on it, so.
Okay.
So I'm mostly focused on large animal feed operations. I don't know how much traffic or other or generated on the medium operation at 15,000 unit, you know, chicken facility. So I would look to others that know that.
All right, we're still at small. Do we like it allowed? Do we want to see more county involvement? A20, A35?
We're talking about the medium and small.
No, we're still in small.
I thought we left that.
No, we didn't. We're still talking about dairy cows. So,
Sounds like no comments on small.
okay, we are moved. I'm sorry. Medium. And this is up to 999,000
On medium.
beef cows.
But also as small as 150. And I think for A35 and A20, it should be allowed 150 cows on 20 acres.
Great. That's what we got. 150 cows and 20 acres is a lot of cows, but
And how many chickens is that allowed on?
0.02 times one. I've been saying 15, it might be 12,000. I'm not a computer. A lot.
Up to 999 times 12,000.
Oh, you're talking about for the medium?
Yeah, for the medium.
A lot of chickens.
We have to look at with that context also.
In the medium, yes.
And not just the minimum. At the maximum.
Right.
And makes what I've seen, even the medium operations that we have here are pretty consistent. We've got trucks coming, going for feed, you've got trucks coming, moving product around. I think a lot of impact on the road structure. I mean, what I've seen around for some of the feeding operations, they're the big semis, and it's definitely an impact on Canada. Again, I think it's a commercial operation. That's the way I look at it. It's not feeding your family, it's going to, you know, they're shipping the eggs.
Slaughterhouse.
Oh, they're shipping, you know, in our situation, they're shipping eggs to a warehouse and they're all going to the range. For all their organic.
So to take your question, 150,000.
Okay. So how big of an operation is there impacts that we,
It's 10 houses, eight or 10 houses.
that's pretty good size operation, it's hard to distinct by that between.
Let's start with medium, rural, industrial, commercial. And we just talked about,
But, yeah, I don't know. For the A5, make it a C, but
Yeah, I guess I feel like it should be C all across the board. because-
I agree, see all across the media.
I would have to go with Todd, but I think that some As should go in the 35, including the medium. I think it should be allowed if you have 35 acres. One way that we could go about this is changing what a small versus a medium is. Because
oh man,
some animals we're talking about, are, it doesn't seem like it's provoking as much emotion as, say, chickens. Like nobody's complaining about 50 horses, whereas 15,000 chickens is a whole different conversation. So that's my take. I think we should have more allowed on 35 acres. But if you wanted to maybe consider changing the numbers of what, the definitions of small, medium, and large and the animal unit. If there is, some kind of state chart, is there any way you could see that or have,
I think I've got it. Got it.
just so you.
they did spend like what, years on this? Or like a separate, yeah,
There's a big,
yeah.
I only use chicken because that's what we've heard most about over time. And the county certainly spends money on chickens.
And there's also requirements surrounding this, so, maybe even if you can do it on 35 acres, it's prohibitive based on the other dust control, noise control, odor control requirements, involved, but.
Yeah,
But if I could-
Look into, in fact, I mean, if they built their thing up to that, or they're looking to invest in it, they're gonna do their diligence. I don't think that type of, I think they would expect sometimes a public hearing process. They'd rather have that information.
Oh, you did.
Again, I point out, each of these applications has a standard they need to meet. The standard needs to be setbacks, access.
Yeah.
Maybe noise, and if they go through and meet those standards, then they should have a recommendation from staff for approval.
Yeah.
Then there's a public hearing. Yes, technically we could deny it, but we'd have to have cause if they meet the standard. So I don't, just because I put a C, doesn't mean we're gonna look to throw it out. It looks to me that we're just holding the public hearing. I just didn't know how to incorporate that into this matrix without calling it C.
So like, like you drive around here, late fall, winter. There's a pretty large number of properties that have more than 150 cows.
We have a provision in there for winter feeding. For like
They're
seasonal
not,
winter
they're not
feeding.
there as a permit,
Yeah,
It's not
They're
a
only
feeding
temporary.
operation.
and meaning they go to pasture in the fall, they're.
So
That was part
that's,
of the AK for working, already included. We didn't want to encourage, we didn't want to discourage people from having the herds. But if they're bringing them in and starting to feed them year round, it becomes a feedlot, and now it's commercial use. We think that's a change in use.
and so this is a use that has specific standards that are applied to, there's like 4 pages of standards.
Right.
But I do want to highlight, because when we say A35, some of the comments seem to just presume that it's 35 acres. We have lots that are smaller than 35 acres in the A35 zone.
Yeah.
You could have a 5-acre lot in the A35 zone with granted variances for that. And in the standards, there's no minimum lot area for small or for an SAFO or CAAP, which is the concentrated aquatic animal production or the small animal feeding operation. So you could have 15,000 chickens on 1 acre. As long as you meet the setbacks,
Theoretically.
The other thing.
because otherwise there's no acreage. The only acreage minimum is for the medium, and the large has to be at least 35
But
acres.
can you meet the other requirements, like?
Probably not with
You
1
probably
acre,
can't
but
actually do it.
But with 5 acres, you could, it's 200 feet from a stream and river. So if you don't have a stream and river or an irrigation, 100 feet. Residential uses, greater of 150 feet or 1 foot per animal unit. I guess, you know,
Again, the 820, 835, 85. There, that designation doesn't take into context of what the ground is. I got 35 acres, but I'm living next to the canyon and it's all down there, and I can only put this in one spot, which is right next to here. That makes a big difference. So again, I'm thinking if they're commercial use, whether it's 835 or not, we should be able to see and hear exactly how it's going. Again, the standards are very strict. And we gotta meet those standards. I'm not looking to change that unless someone else is, but I'm saying it's just a public hearing. I don't think the 835, just because you immediately think of 35 acres, but 35 acres in some places is very small usable ground sometimes.
Well, the topography has to figure in.
But it doesn't in our zoning designation, right? We just call it 835. So that's why I'm saying if you know you're gonna want to do something in a chicken barn or something like that, it goes to a public hearing. At least it'll be, everybody will know where it's going.
So you're saying there's 5 acre parcels that are zoned 835?
yeah,
Yeah.
So what's the point of zoning?
Well,
And that makes it pretty complicated, because now you're saying, well, yeah, you can have a medium-sized animal operation on 835, because the assumption is there are at least 35 acres.
we're still creating them with variances.
Yeah.
That's the whole lot size variance.
But why would they be a line size variance instead of just having them rezone the property?
So the next section, we're supposed to go through the zoning.
I won't get it.
I mean, it's a recognized problem.
I mean, yeah, that's, you hit the nail on the head.
Okay, line 3, medium animal feeding operation. A5, I'm hearing some appetite for changing it to a C.
I'm gonna tell them on this.
You want to see C, you want to see Cs on mediums and larges.
Yeah.
Up to 999 cows and above.
In every category?
Or RIC.
Definitely.
Rural industrial.
Why is concentrated aquatic and large not allowed at all in the RIC?
How'd that go?
I'm not gonna, if you, I don't know if you.
There's no RICs that are big enough to handle the setbacks.
For aquatic?
But what if we rezone a parcel that is?
Wait, you're talking
I don't
about
know why you would
Industrial?
rezone, do that, but.
an industrial?
Yeah, all our RICs are pretty small, right?
No. We got some huge ones that like behind.
The
No,
mines are-
The mine.
are-
Planning to put some fish.
Yeah, we could be changing those as well to A. Maybe for Todd, everything in the RIC on the intensive bit should be A.
I mean, that's right, I think that's what.
I'd be
RIC
fine
is
with
for.
that, yeah.
I like that.
Instead of all these negative lines.
Yeah. So we're saying all animal feeding operations are A on RICs.
Yeah.
We will suggest that to the BOCC. And in medium, we're not changing anything else on A5, 20, 35, we're keeping it notified, and if the neighbors have concerns,
I
directly.
heard that there was this general consensus to change it to C.
Oh, see,
Medium and large.
You're not speaking for everybody, I heard from 3.
sure.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to see it A on 35, but that's just.
Make it 2, I want A.
Too big of a bite.
Too
Two line.
line. I know, 2 lines.
This is, yeah.
Medium, we're sticking to medium. So we have A on rural industrial.
Well, we should hear from everybody. Lane and Dean and Cindy, it's important that you.
Yeah. we-
835, I'm okay, but on the smaller ones, I like to see, I do.
Mr. Bronis, any thoughts?
I like to see it in smaller ones.
Smaller, meaning A20 and below or A5
Yeah,
and below?
820.
And David, you feel C at all? So C's on 5 and 20.
Yeah, I'm torn in this. I mean, my comments last week were about the rights of neighbors. We need to take those into consideration, and I truly believe that, and give them the ability to sound off. And so my sentiments gotta go with these actions, but also predictability was a big part of our master plan. Be a huge part of our master plan, and that applied in a lot of ways to commercial enterprises. And without having a lot of commercial industrial zone space, that means all this other space has commercial potential. And I get nervous about limiting that.
Again, again, we're not limiting it. We're just saying you gotta review it. And I know it's hard to.
Predictability,
And so with that said, I would caution going any less stringent on these, particularly for a medium and concentrated and large. That if we're gonna say you can just go build it and hope it meets specs. Yeah. we're gonna be-
When you're talking about manure and stuff, it is a public health concern.
Personally,
I think, but even if it is allowed, it still has to follow it has to meet the standards of the code.
Right.
So in the code, the standards, like Carl said, is 4 pages of standards for ag operations. I mean, there's no stone left unturned.
right,
So
but the L ensures we're there to hold their hand through it because chances are they're just gonna build it.
Well, the L allows it to be done administratively, the C doesn't. That's the only difference.
That's
The other thing, well, that to meet the standard.
But who's talking about the difference between A and L?
They want to see A's in the 35s and I caution them.
or at least if they're Ls that they're not requiring public hearings. I don't think that, because
We're not-
when you have that, you, like we're saying, we have the opportunity, the staff and the board of county commissioners already have the opportunity to put in additional requirements. So if people are, like they just said, conditions, if the neighbors are writing in and say, this in our area, there's all these different problems that it's gonna cause. I think they're gonna read that and take it into consideration, just like we would. I understand that there's not an in-person meeting before, or I guess there's not one in general, but
So only staff would see it. Not board of county commissioners, they don't see it. So that's my whole point. There isn't really no way for the public to have presented unless they write it. That's the only way. And from what I've heard is they feel sometimes staff ignores what they write.
And,
unless it's appealed,
Say it again.
unless it's appealed.
But even if it's administratively approved and then and people hear about it too late.
It's too late.
It's already too late.
But they're gonna still appeal it.
It's sort of.
Oh, yeah, but
That's the whole point, avoid that mess that we just had, somebody appealed mini storage and it was appealed in July and it was.
Well, that's not a fair assessment, DK, because that was an error on staff. You're not making a fair assessment for the way the land use code was set up to work. Because what happened was there was an interpretation as far as the type of use that it was a limited use with public notice. The public notice didn't happen. So the applicant was given an approval. So now you have a vested interest of somebody who's gotten an approval, they've gone out and invested in that property. The way staff tried to bridge that was to notify the neighbors and give them the opportunity to appeal basically after the fact, to try to correct the error that was made by not creating that notification up front. Had the notification been put up front, the neighbors would have known what the staff was doing early on and not having to wait the 3 months. So, basing it on an error of how the process works, I don't think is the right way to look at this. How should it have worked? The neighbors would have been notified. They would have had opportunity to provide input. If there was concern, the director had the opportunity then to elevate it. Once it was approved, that person, once they've invested in the property, there's an estoppel right for them to be able to continue. So we were trying to find a balance there.
But under the approval, under that second scenario, there still is an appealable period.
Correct.
Administrative decision.
Right, and had it been the right way, it would have been before the applicant would have taken into it and made the investment. The fact is, it was brought to staff's attention about a month and a half after the approval. So the property owner had already invested in purchasing the units.
So I think you are helping make the point though, that why should we fully rely on administrative action? Because there are gonna be errors, right? It's human, so there's gonna be human error, and the hearing process helps mitigate that in itself.
If that had been in the C category, there'd be no issues. Would have been a public hearing.
So what happens if it would have been just a limited with no notice and it would have gotten approved anyway? Somebody still has the right to appeal an administrative decision.
Again, the reason we're sitting here is to try to maybe correct that. So if it goes to a C conditional, then the applicant knows that there's gonna be a.
Right, but what I'm getting at is, are you gonna change everything to a C to make sure that's
TJ,
there's
well,
no,
Yeah,
no error on staff's part?
Not everything, no.
But that's kind of what we're looking at.
The only thing we're looking at right now is medium animal feeding operation.
But
That's right.
got her hand up.
Victoria.
I guess I'm just confused on what part of the animal operation we're so concerned is gonna affect the neighbors.
these are feeding operations, so they're
Yeah.
designated commercial entities that are there to feed before slaughter.
Yeah, I mean, more specifically after the standards. What about the standards are not strict enough that we still see potential for such an issue with the neighbors?
If I read the neighbors correctly in media comments, water and traffic are big issues. I don't think our standards say they gotta have adequate water. But it doesn't say where. And that's fine with me. I mean, they gotta have it, they gotta figure it out. Traffic is another thing. I don't think our standards say anything about traffic.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of traffic impact discussion that occurs out there. I think that's always gonna be a concern on fairly large commercial impacts. Traffic generally in this county is getting a lot of attention from a lot of people. That would be an area that having a public hearing could help bring out, because I don't think there's a standard under our CAFO regs on traffic.
Truck routing,
And it's not just traffic, but are the neighbors to subsidize the maintenance of the road, right?
and I think that's covered as well.
Is there screening issues or dust control from offsite? I don't think there is, from a dirt road offsite, creating dust from traffic. I don't think we do have standards for that.
So, Victoria, when we had the Garnet Mesa facility, one of the neighbors came in and said, hey, we've seen their plan, it doesn't screen us. So the planning commission went beyond what the recommendation was and said, we want you to put in screens. Had the neighbor not spoken up, it would never have been done.
Well, I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from, is that as it's set right now, it seems the neighbors still have a chance to speak up. Maybe. we
Not if you
can-
change it to A. Absolutely, no one has.
As it is right now.
Right.
As it is right now, the neighbors can still speak up, the staff can still hear the concerns. Maybe the concerns should be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners. You know, they might be required maybe to be forwarded. I don't know why the Board of County Commissioners wouldn't see the concerns from the neighbors upon their decision making. I think that is really
Because
important.
they don't decide.
My understanding, if we change a lot of this to A, then there would be
No
no,
one's-
there'd be no screen, there would be no one being heard, things would just happen. And then afterwards, if it was an issue,
Mhm.
then it would be brought, and then it would be like trying to fix something that's already been in process, right? Am I understanding that right? So I think the whole idea is not playing Big Brother as much as having, kind of a rules of engagement. Because, when we do something, the whole idea is that, yes, we've got to, do all of these steps. The whole idea is to protect the neighbors, their integrity, their, what's happening with them, but there's gotta be a balance, and you have to start with some kind of a rule of engagement. It's not gonna make everybody happy, but the whole idea is that if down the road we see that maybe this one is being a little more constringent than it's supposed to, we can always reapproach that and say, hey, we've had some of these come up, and maybe this is one we really need to relook. This seems to be a barrier. Is that what we're trying to do?
They did the gravel pit over here. All the concerns were from outside. They were, your truck drivers drive way too fast on this road. What are you gonna do about that? Well, we'll, put a policy in place. there's dust and we have screening issues because a bunch of kids that play on that road. Okay, well, we'll put up some screening. What about hours of operation? Well, we're gonna start at 3 a.m. Well, that sounds like it's gonna wake up the neighborhood.
Right.
So that's the opportunity for the neighbors to come in and get the answers from the applicant, where the applicant can take action. We're gonna ask the applicant, are you willing to work on your hours of operation or establish policies for speed control? And that's the main chance that neighbors have to get their concerns addressed, which has been the whole thing.
Okay, no more debate on animal feeding operations. I'm calling it. We're gonna go line by line. Start with medium animal feeding operation, residential, commercial. All those in favor of changing it to A, please raise your hand. Got one. Great. All those in favor of keeping it at LN, please raise your hand. Got one. All those in favor of changing it to conditional, please raise your hand. That is changing to conditional. Great.
I'm sorry, did you say industrial or residential?
Rural, industrial, commercial.
You said
I said
residential.
residential. I'm sorry.
Okay, rural, industrial, or commercial for medium feeding
It
operations.
is not allowed in residential currently,
Yeah, right.
and I was gonna keep
I
it.
think that should stay that way.
Was that,
Making sure.
were we clear
I thought
on
we
the
were all
vote?
pretty on board of changing it to A, and then when I was the one that raised my hand, I was like, yeah, maybe we're not talking the same.
Yeah. We're gonna redo that. Rural, industrial, commercial. As an A, raise your hand.
Okay.
Okay. Glad you, thank you. Thanks for speaking up, Doc. A5. All those in favor of keeping it LN, please raise your hand. And changing it to C.
Do we have to
We got
vote?
medium.
Medium.
Just check.
A5, A5,
P5, C,
C, okay. Sorry, this is how we gotta do it. Medium, A20, are we going to C? Okay. Now, medium, A35, LN? Nobody.
Oh, wait, yeah. So-
Okay.
I didn't think
Medium.
Ellen, I don't know. I'm okay with whatever people decide.
Medium A35, C. Medium A35A. And I have like 3 abstentions, so it changes to a C. Now, am I safe to presume we can follow that down to concentrated aquatic? No, we're gonna go line by line, okay. Rural industrial, A, raise your hand. Okay, we're gonna see more of these. A5 for concentrated aqua, CAAP, remain at LN. Or we're gonna change it to C. Raise your hand. Okay, we're going to C's. A20, are we going to C? Going to C. Now A35. TK is just raising his hand. Wants to be consistent. C, A35 for aquatic. Okay, it looks like we want to see C's on these. For large, rural, industrial, commercial, would we like to see an A? Okay,
Yeah, A, right.
A. And then can we copy and paste, CCC? I mean,
Or CC, or you want to add C in the A5? Because right now
Oh,
it's not
now it's
allowed
not
in the A5.
I would still say, yeah, not allowed in the.
great, we got through intensive agriculture, guys. Did it. I'll take a poll from the planning commission. Do we want to work on tackling residential land category? Do we want to go home and do some homework? Do we not like how this is going? Let's just go quickly around the room. Cindy. Keep moving.
I mean, I would continue, I mean, Yeah,
Just
I mean, I
keep
think the
going line
hardest
by
one was
line.
that first one.
You think so?
Oh,
I think so.
You're optimist.
Yeah.
TK, you want to keep moving?
Yeah, I don't know that there's much in the rural residential land use companies that I
Yeah.
think are. We, you
I'm
know, I
fine
feel
with
like
those.
we could jump- I think we could jump to the agricultural support and rural industries land use categories. And community land use categories. And
How about this? If someone sees a line that they see in rural residential
Yeah, there
that
you
we'd
go.
like to vote on, speak now. And I'll give you a minute.
Is there anything in the?
Additional resources, is it L or is it A? For A35.
Additional residences.
L.
L, no notice.
We'll notice in R.
Notice in RIC and the A 2.5 and residential 1.
Concerns?
I would like to see it changed to A on A35.
A35,
Additional residences.
no review.
I guess my only, or not,
no, the
Not-
next one down below, additional residence.
additional residences, Todd would like to see A in A35, so. My argument against that, Todd, would be, those are the areas in particular that we want to preserve agriculture. And allowing without any review, unlimited development of residences, seems contrary to that. I think
Yeah.
we would like to assume that everyone is gonna follow the regulations, but I think what we have seen in this county in the past is that they assume there are no rules, and so they don't even look at what the state rules are. They don't look at what the setbacks are. They don't, they assume I'm allowed to do it. I don't need to look at any rules. Not everyone, but I think that's what we've seen has happened.
Is anyone else in favor of A35 going to A? Victoria?
I would also support that, just because I think that, there's a couple things that don't really make sense to me in this, like, for example, multifamily dwelling units.
Wait, I do want to stay, I want to stay.
Okay, but it just is like the same thing in my mind. It's like, okay, we're talking about an additional residence that is maybe supporting a second family on a 35-acre lot. And then we're also talking about, one building that is supporting many families. And then the single, the accessory dwelling unit, that's also, that's already on the same septic, right? That's on the same septic, same water tap. So I guess my question is, what's the difference between, what's the big deal between allowing an additional residence and an ADU?
Actually, I had this question for a joint session. I didn't bring it up. I was curious of what the definition was between an additional residence and like a single family.
So the ADU can't be subdivided, whereas an additional residence could later be subdivided.
Is that it?
Well,
And they share-
effectively,
Sewer and all the things, so the idea of the ADU was tied to the original place, it's not allowed to be.
But then that's when they would have to go through.
Well, they, right up front, if they build an ADU and tie it into their existing service, they can't.
No, but like the additional residence, like I see you're saying like later that could be subdivided, but that's the point where then, okay, now you are coming to talk to us.
That's the problem.
Yeah, well, if
Is that what we've been
if it's
seeing?
too late,
Because they come to us and we'd say, why the hell did you plan it like that?
because what if they don't have the right access then for it, or they're saying, wait a minute, we built it and we're using this joint access, but the person who just bought this house and owns that joint access doesn't want them to have access.
We just went through a cluster like this last fall.
Right, Old Mesa.
Bull Mesa, Armstrong, patriarch of the family, had a 40-acre spot. Okay, they built 4 or 5 houses in a cluster.
That's right.
And according to our Delta County regulations, one driveway that's servicing 3 homes or more should be declared a county road.
That's right, not a
Now, that's
roadway.
not, and I don't know if they ever got this cluster figured out yet. And
Because
that
that's
should
too late.
not be
Five
true.
different septic systems, they weren't all, I don't know if there was, the septic systems, they all had the right setbacks.
So, but then that's their issue that they didn't pre-plan and think out what they're.
Yeah,
gonna
but
do.
so the guy was either dying or the family took over.
He ended up croaking and they all,
I mean, it comes to us, it's our problem, so why not plan in advance?
some
Well-
some of the homes were built by him, some of them were built by the individuals. There's a couple up there that get serviced by the same outdoor wood burning furnace. How do you split those properties up? You know, you go out there and cut the furnace in half? I mean, there was no planning at all.
Well, what I recall was that it was planned to not be subdivided, but once the patriarch passed away,
Yeah.
the kids couldn't get along and so they wanted to split it all up. So
So you don't, I don't think there are.
it's what happens in the future.
So with addition. Let's bring it back here.
Hardship variance, and that ends up.
Okay. Let's just vote on it. All those in favor of changing it to an allowed use on A35, raise your hand. All those in favor of keeping it as it is, raise your hand. Didn't mean to cut that short, but I kind of felt like I saw where it was going. Anything else in rural residential? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question on, again, so why are the multifamily dwelling units limited? If, in a sense, it's basically a giant house, because they're all connected, it's like an apartment complex, but it's only 4 units, or up to 4 units, 4 plus. It's just one structure though. And they have to pass all the state permits, the septic, the electricity, you know, they have to pass all that, so why are we limiting that when we are in need of housing in this area? I just don't understand like why we're restricting, but then right below it, residential assisted living for up to 8 non-related people is allowed. So if you're allowing 8 potentially completely separate families, by definition, how is that different than 4 families in one house?
So it's 8 people, not 8 families.
I know, but the family definition is like what any person unrelated to another that are not married or.
Are you suggesting that they change all of the multifamily to A? And leave, or are you suggesting that we change the residential assisted living to L?
Multifamily is units to be sold individually, so like 4 units in one building. Or it's attached buildings that get sold. They're typically individually owned, not necessarily
Like a
for
condo.
one, not for one family necessarily.
It doesn't say that though, does it?
Could be apartments or condos.
Yeah, condos, apartments, but that's typically what it means, in our definitions, it probably doesn't put it that way. And so there are state codes to follow, but we don't carry them through, and there's things like firewalls that have to be built for multifamily units, and we still wouldn't be checking that, because it's no building code, but what it really means is there's individual units within one building to be owned separately.
Or occupied separately.
Well, and I just don't see the problem with that, I guess.
But I think it's a little bit of a conceptual mistake to say L is, the county is trying to limit the existence of those things. Limited is a review process to ensure that if someone's building a building that either will be sold as 4 separate units or occupied by 4 separate families, that the infrastructure is in place to facilitate that. And I think, again, it's a pretty big philosophical disagreement, whether you think we should rely on individuals to follow the rules without review, or whether we think that people should have review to do that. But limited does not mean we want to limit these in the county. It means we want to make sure that the people that are building them are doing so in a way that is smart about their planning and that is following the rules.
Like emergency access, right? At some point, those will be all owned by individual people. Is there emergency access for fire? All that gets looked at in the review. Otherwise, if it's allowed, nobody's looking.
So if an applicant understands what the standards are for what they're wanting to do, we create a process where they have to come talk to us for basically us to reiterate what those standards are. They go home and don't follow any of those standards. How do we ever know?
Complaint driven.
So, okay, so enforcement.
So enforcement side, some of the things that we run into. There's a big misconception of what you believe the state will regulate, like saying they'll regulate it, to what they will do. I've run into this wall
nonstop, mobile homes, other stuff. The state will say, oh, we'll revoke their CO. Well, guess what? Delta County doesn't do COs. In essence, they then tell me it is upon the local government to enforce. Because they're not sending someone from Denver to look at a mobile home that doesn't have a DOLA sticker. They're not gonna do it. When you have mobile homes, mobile home parks, they say, oh, the state regulates those. Negative. When you register 5 mobile homes as a mobile home park, all you've done is create a system that the state will regulate for complaints. They become a mediating factor between landlord and tenant. They do not design, set up, or regulate how it is designed. They're a complaint center. That's it.
And to his question, if someone again applies, doesn't follow the rules, do we have enforcement regarding that?
You can call the state, but they're not coming down.
So
Well, that's just mobile homes.
Not for
If,
mobile.
if somebody, if it's an allowed use, somebody doesn't follow all the standards or regulations,
Right.
yes, the county can enforce. At this point, the county is doing it reactive, so if it's brought to our attention, we will go out and enforce it. We don't go out looking for it.
It's very common and environmental health is overloaded and also restricted in their ability to enforce.
I can name 3 of them, just.
They are rampant.
I think the expectation of a home group, if I buy an A5 and I consider this single family residential A5. And then all the neighbors around me built 4plexes, 6plexes, or 8plexes. It really isn't the same condition.
And there goes.
And that's why the L is there. It's to have some sort of planning. Actually, the more you bring it up, the more I'm gonna think it should be a C. I mean, if you're gonna change the character, if you're gonna change the character of your neighborhood by what you do, even though the land use permits it. It should have neighborhood input. I mean, you go down a nursing home, it's all C. I don't know that there's much difference between residential assisted.
I think
living and
back-
nursing.
I think back to what you were wondering about in the first place, Victoria, is the 4 dwelling units, 4+ dwelling units is separate units intended to be occupied by different families or different individuals. A residential assisted living facility would be a single unit, so to speak, a single home that houses up to 8 people. You know, whether there's 2 people in a bedroom or, you know, whatever, a single facility. Probably managed by one entity with rooms for 8 people and the infrastructure and. Basically the infrastructure needs for that type of facility is different than for a 8 unit condo
I
facility.
just think this is asking for something that is unenforceable. I mean, if you go up to a giant building and say, is this your home or is this a multifamily home? There's nothing you could do either way. You know, if they say it's a family home, whether they have 4 families in there and they're renting them. And to jump back to the character, I think this changes the character of Delta County. By limiting and asking, like you're saying, asking for approval for everything.
But this
mean-
isn't saying you can't have 4 families that live in the same home. It's saying if you have 4 or more units that each have a bathroom, that each have a kitchen, that each have electricity, that each have a vehicle going to them. Like there's some oversight in how that is designed.
And they're deeded separately, I think you need
Yeah.
to understand the difference.
Well, the definition isn't deeded separately, it's occupied separately.
It could be apartments that aren't deeded.
But it would be
Okay,
different,
so-
it would be different addresses. They'd have a postal address potentially or.
They
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
deeded separately.
They can be, it could be a condominium, it could also be, yeah.
So
Okay,
it's
is there,
either-
is there an appetite to change multifamily?
Sounds like Victoria wants to make it
I would
A.
just like to explore. And I guess we're gonna get in there further, but to really lay it out what the process looks like to have some of these Ls approved. Because I think that some standards, you know, are necessary, and I think that for some things, they're just not. And I think that also, like I said, there's things we can enforce and there's things we can't enforce. And it just becomes this really sticky situation when we're having things that are so close that, you know, what, are we gonna accuse someone of having a multifamily?
No, there's no restriction on, you can build a single family house as big as you want, there's absolutely no restrictions, you can have
Or
10
families?
families in there, 10 families. If that's not a multi-family structure, a multi-family structure is meant to be occupied by different people, and it's either an apartment or a condo or a town.
Thanks, Jay.
So they're viewed
To
separately.
that, I would encourage you, asking that we're gonna go deeper into how the process works. I encourage you to do your homework and look. It's in the land use code.
Well, and I have, and that's what I'm concerned about, is because I just feel like, okay, so for 3+ living units, dwelling units. Like we just said, you have to have a county road on your property, so if I want a multifamily dwelling unit, I've got to now have a county road and 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 addresses. And the process of doing that is not easy, and we're coming from a place where we've never had to do that, where we've always been allowed. Yes, it's caused some issues, but out of all the development that's happened in this county compared to the amount that have caused issues, serious issues, I just think that that's something that we could be a little bit more.
Just a quick clarification, it's not a requirement for a county road. So I want to be careful, it does say road, but it is not a county road. County does not maintain
Yeah.
it, so I'm just trying to be careful here.
But it has to be up
Yeah.
to county standards.
Local road
Road
standard.
design
Local
standards,
road standard for your money.
which I'm sure can be very expensive.
It's also not true that there has never been, in the special use process, before the code was here, you had to ask permission for everything, not nothing.
Also under the development application ordinance, which the limited use follows the development application ordinance of site plan review, access, address, and OWTS.
So if you wanted to do some multi-family structure in the county, you had to come to the planning commission with no guarantees that you would get through. It was, yep, that was the process.
Residential was exempting, all residential was exempted.
No.
I don't know if that's true for multi-family.
There was a philosophy that all residential is the.
An assumption, and you know what happens when you assume.
Well, multifamily, we're not. changing. Is there anything else in rural residential land use category that you'd like to see changed? I know you kind of adjusted that, maybe we bump it up to C, but it didn't be observed.
Again, I feel like some of these are commercial uses, a residential assisted living. If you're taking care of your family, that's one thing, but if you have a facility that you're bringing in people, 8 people non-related.
But I think about impact. Are
Yeah.
those folks driving?
Probably not.
Somebody's driving to see them. Family.
If they're
driving.
nice.
Again, it's.
Depends on who it is.
Again, it's a commercial facility, it's run for commercial operation.
Sure.
And that's really where I sort of, in my mind, I just don't think we should allow any type of commercial operation. I'm not saying not allow them, I'm just saying they should have some type of process to allow that. I know if I'm in a rural area, that if someone's gonna put up a 10-unit assisted living center next to me, I'm gonna at least be notified. I would agree with that. That's all I'm saying. It's a commercial use, and right now, it's A.
Go to well.
So if you're gonna mitigate it, I guess go to L. I'd love to see it C, but again, a residential treatment facility, congregate care, I'm assuming that may be some type of maybe drug treatment or anything like that. Again, a commercial facility, maybe run by nonprofit or anything like that. Well, it's already got L's and C's on it, so I'll shut up.
So, go ahead.
And am I correct in hearing that from the joint session last time that the county commissioners are gonna be hesitant to change from L's to C?
You don't know.
Well, these two are their categories. They were not there before.
Right, they didn't make an indication of that. Is there an appetite to bump up residential assisted living up to 8 people?
At least to L. At least.
In every
Yeah,
zone?
I think the rural industrial.
Oh, my grandma's not living in the rural industrial.
Okay, yeah, let's vote. Rural industrial, keep as A, raise your hand.
Yeah.
Residential assisted living, is that what you're?
Residential assisted living, forgive me, thank
Yeah, I
you.
would say that's, doesn't even qualify for residential.
Yeah.
I don't exactly know why it's in here, but
Big,
the red flag.
there. Yeah, and this assumes, I think, a single family or a single home.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And somebody decides to open it up for multiple, up to 8
mhm.
assisted living residents living there. No huge impact, it doesn't fit in an industrial area.
Sure.
Maybe I just haven't read the depth, with assisted living, I mean, are you talking residential treatment? Facilities like drug and alcohol, sex. and
That's
gender?
They're usually just older people.
That's why it was separated.
Yeah.
Need a
And other state regulations, stuff like that, for bathrooms, all that.
Yes.
Yeah, but less traffic out there, you know.
Okay, so, I'm gonna go back, starting at A 2.5 residential 1. All those in favor of keeping it as an A, please raise your hand.
I think, I
Okay,
don't know, I would say A is fine, yeah.
okay, all those in favor of bumping it up to an L, please raise your hand. Okay, so in A, are you getting? those?
A 2.5,
Thank God.
right? And R1,
Yes, L.
L.
Residential or rural industrial commercial, forgive me.
That was, you voted that, say that to A, keep that as A, or?
No, we're gonna revote that.
Gonna revote that, okay.
All those in favor of keeping it A, raise your hand. Those in favor of striking it from rural industrial commercial. Stays.
Which one are we talking about?
Residential.
Couldn't you highlight it, maybe?
Yeah, we should. We pass a resolution that will never, ever come back to this. This is at least our 3rd time at it, and with commissioners, it's got 5 times.
Or at least we take better notes of what we all talked about last time.
Okay, so rural industrial commercial. There was a split vote here, residential assisted living, and rural industrial commercial. Voting to keep it as A, please raise your hand. It's 4, 5, slowly. All those in favor of bumping it up to an L, please raise your hand. It's 2, okay, it stays as A. Great, moving on, A5. Again, same thing. All those in favor of keeping it as an A, please raise your hand. And bumping it up to an L, please raise your hand. Okay. And an A20, those in favor of bumping it up to an L, please raise your hand. Okay. And presumably for A35 to an L, raise your hand. Okay, great. We have a little bit more oversight over residential assisted living. Anything else? Rural residential land use category? Okay,
Can I propose something? Mr.
sure,
Bush?
sure.
Obviously, some of us are more boisterous about certain areas than others, as we're seeing. Could we propose that on the rest of the chart, the grid, that we individually all go back and we maybe asterisk the ones that we think are maybe ones that we'd like to maybe discuss versus going line by line, because I think some of them are gonna be fairly what we will agree on that sounds pretty good, and that way we got through 2 of those grids, boxes.
Sure.
Just an idea, and then that way we come and we're prepared to say, hey, the one that, how does everybody feel about, this one or that one, and then we can just go through a lot quicker.
I was gonna say, reading the language of the room and looking at the hour, I was gonna suggest doing some homework. That might be a good suggestion.
One more suggestion or question in the rural residential land use category.
Okay.
Residential treatment facility.
Yes.
I assume that could apply
Definition.
to like drug treatment.
Correct.
In my mind, I think that should be a C across the board.
So I guess that's what they're talking about here.
We were still
I thought.
in
we were
that.
still finished.
I'm still in that chart.
But I think it's essentially what you're saying,
Yes.
is take the chart and go through and mark it yourself.
But I'm okay if we wanna just get.
To finish,
We're done with.
I do like what Todd covered. We're talking about drug and alcohol usually, on a facility, treatment
That
facility.
one being new does not have a definition at all, so that might be
Right.
helpful to at
Oh,
least get
okay.
a definition in there.
Yeah, the two of them, the assisted living and the
Yeah.
treatment facility, we could work on the
Are there
definition.
any opposed to changing that to a C?
You go.
We're gonna get a lot of.
Yeah.
Get a lot of opinions.
Like, or wow.
It doesn't limit the size.
So that one was all going to see.
I'll go ahead and see.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like, I think,
Definition.
Tate, let's bring it back in real quick. I think someone had said that we thought we could have this done in one night, whoever said that. I was Cindy, oh. I love it. Good, we have some homework, let's, yeah, come back, ask Rick. You know, if you can, we could send them to staff, that way we can have it at least, so we're not coming in full.
So we could go say, okay, let's look, at, you know, let's look at, you know, agricultural support, whatever, we could say anyone in this category that we need to talk about. You know, we could almost do them by categories instead of line by line. That's what the problem is.
Right.
But again, it's optimistic.
Yeah, so that's the plan. So going forward, what's our timing?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, they did not give a timeline. I
No.
wanted to have you all have the luxury of going through this and putting your input in. You do have a couple of applications that are gonna take an evening by themselves each. So, you know, you also have your regular work. So if you
So what
want,
is our next?
so you talked about having another work session on. See, what was that? The sixth. Is
September
what
6th.
was
Okay.
potential
So 2
dates
weeks.
thrown out,
Okay.
so 2 weeks. You want to shoot for that?
Do we have anything on the agenda? Is anything
Not,
scheduled?
not for the
Special.
sixth, that would be just for land use code on the sixth.
That'd be great.
So the two things that are applications
Mhm.
are, they're being scheduled for
Yeah,
a normal meeting time somewhere down the road.
yes.
The second and fourth.
There's so that Brittany and Kate have a planning conference or training and certification the last week of September. So it would be you'll basically meet every Wednesday in September. First for your land use, then second and third for your applications.
So the sixth is not a, it's an extra.
The six would be just to do the land, that's what we're doing right now, right? Work session.
13th is the scheduled planning commission,
Right.
and then we don't have anything on the 20th. You're saying we do?
You
You're saying we
will,
would?
right, because.
It'd be here.
But it would be a hearing because of an application,
So not on the 27th,
no.
Because you're gone.
because our department is gone, yes.
Okay, so we're moving the 27th to the 20th.
Correct.
So the sixth, the 13th, and the 20th is what we're talking about, having the sixth would be ours to finish this up.
Keep working.
Let's stay optimistic.
And that's
I think we
great.
can.
We all know, like, Monday, you have to come back and.
Okay. It's a busy day.
Hopefully we can move faster, we
Busy.
follow a format.
We gotta get out of this table.
But as I recall,
I'm just asking, I'm kind of optimistic. On the sixth, would we want to try to meet a little earlier? At 5, or is that pushing people too hard
can we do that?
on schedule? I'm just asking.
5:30 is kind of.
Okay, I just started asking. Okay.
We get out of the table, let's talk about next steps. Where else do we want to go? Do we need to go?
I think section by section, we just see if people have any thoughts about
Per section,
chapters.
and not like reading section by section, but just opening a section and
Yes.
saying, did you do your homework? Do you have?
Correct.
There you go.
We need to read it.
There is.
What do you got in here?
There is some language regarding water and, you know, and residences, when that comes up, we should have, we should.
That'd be a bit fun.
Cistern language, I have things under, the boards of adjustment that been changed that I have questions or concerns about.
So we'll plan to get hopefully out of the matrix within an hour, and then we'll go section by section, see where it ends up. Maybe plan on it being a later meeting and hopefully we can just knock it out, because otherwise we're not gonna get to this until
Yeah, let's get it done.
late October, so. Let's plan.
I'll let you know meetings on other days besides Wednesdays, but yeah.
Hey, is there any way you could just email us just specifically these sections on the grids? I know it's in the packet too, I guess we could do it that way, but
What do you mean?
Just table 2B.
yes,
Of what we, oh, just him.
just. yeah,
That's the
just-
table, so that you guys can mark on it, is that what you're wanting?
Awesome. Thank you.
Great, okay, we'll end the work session there. I have department report. Robbie has an announcement.
I emailed you all the announcement of the director, name, timing, etc. So you have that in your email. Again, Kate and Brittany will be at their training and certification the end of September. We are working through applications very diligently and answering tons and tons of questions. So there's lots of applications that are not before you all, but before planning. So there's been, you know, you didn't meet for quite some time. There wasn't a ton of activity. There is now, just based on the information that's being put forward in the application. Any questions, concerns, let me know.
6/13/21.
Are you gonna talk to the new director again?
Am I gonna talk about him now? No. I mean, I emailed that to all of you,
When
so
do we expect him to?
the 2nd of October.
So in this time frame we're looking at here. Percent of the meeting.
Say that again.
In this time frame that we're looking at in our schedule, the person of the year.
Correct.
But he, no,
Please no.
But it will be here in October
Correct.
and we're likely to still be doing this.
well,
Not according to Brittany.
I don't think so. I don't think, we're gonna get through this. And send our initial draft.
Well, when you say still doing this, the land use code will not be done.
No.
The planning commission's initial review of the land use code. Hopefully
Could be.
could be done.
Because remember, this is.
It
just
still
our
goes, then
initial review,
with this
public
discussion
hearing.
here, it goes back to the board. The board will have other input. Then it'll eventually come to the planning commission as a formal review. You'll have 30 days to report back at that point.
But no hearings.
Not at the planning commission level. That will be, the board has decided that the public hearings will be held by the board once the planning commission is reported back to the board. So probably closer to the end of the year, November.
So, procedure question in a managerial way, are you going to allow Carl to help bring this communication in? Update them on what's going on, what our language code is, and what's going on with it. That's the project is gonna go forward. I don't know exactly how much experience this guy's got, but
No, there'll
there's gonna be
be
a lot going on for a new director.
advantages.
He's got to jump in and welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Swin.
And Carl will be the lead for the LUC, essentially, Austin will inherit it. The way I'm looking at it. He's probably just gonna have to get up to speed with how to run our system and, you know, get with these guys. And then he'll inherit a new code. hopefully.
Right, yeah, he can follow along with it, but I'll be processing the land use code as a special project.
I didn't get, maybe we haven't seen his resume. Has he been a planning director before?
Not been a director, he has been a planner.
Planner in a planning
Manager.
case.
Okay, if there's nothing else. We are adjourned.
Well, nice.
One. Try to like. For the 6th or something. Something. It will